Good evening and welcome to Strange Slumber. I'm your friend Elaine, and today I'll be reading you to sleep with true and scary stories of experiences that people had that they couldn't explain. If you like going to sleep to strange, weird, or scary stories, go ahead and fondle that subscribe button and caress the notifications button, and I'll be telling you stories every week that'll put you in a strange slumber. Now cozy up, turn off the lights, and let's get started. I was in the basement of the hospital grabbing a new gurney as ours was ripped apart from a violent patient. It was 3 a.m. PICU was on the 3rd floor and it was locked down for the night. No visitors in the hospital. The basement storage unit was packed with stuff, so when I felt my shirt get pulled on, I assumed it got caught on an object. Then it happened again, only this time I heard a little girl's voice, crystal clear, saying, "I'm lost." My heart was pounding. I felt all the hairs on my body stand up, and I called my partner down to help with the gurney. I want reproducible scholarly data and experiments, but I had a full-body apparition that I thought was my wife walking down the hallway of our home, and I talked to her for several seconds. She didn't reply, and when we went into the kitchen, she disappeared in front of me. Then my wife came out of the kids' bedroom behind me, where the ghost came out just moments before, and asked me who I was talking to. I was alone for the very first time, going through the Denver bus station around Christmas. Being alone there scared the hell out of me. It was my trip back home, and I was not digging being in the city Greyhound station at 10 p.m. I'd sat on the ground by where the bus was supposed to come and started reading a book. While I was sitting down, a guy asked if he could put his stuff near me and sit too. I said yes and didn't mind to even look up. I didn't talk to men, no less at the bus stop, though I finally looked up when he started a conversation. He looked exactly like my brother who had passed, and sounded just like him. He asked where I was going and how the holidays went. The conversation somehow had hit a lot of points of my life up to from when he passed, like how I had moved up to the mountains, and he wished he could go see that mountain town. He talked about missing his girlfriend and asked if I had a partner. I was actually coming home from spending a few days with my first girlfriend and her family. He high-fived me for liking girls too. Very on character from what my brother would have done. We talked about how I was starting to teach myself guitar, etc. It was hard not to cry while talking to him. His bus was the one that came before mine, and he said goodbye and left. I did not get his name. He never said where he was going, only said that he was from a small town in northern Colorado, of which is where me and my brother are from, and that was it. I came home and cried in my mom's bed for hours. Love between a grandparent and their grandchild knows no bounds. My grandpa passed away in 2019. I wore his Star of David necklace I found in his retirement apartment. I believe his spirit was attached to the necklace because when I brought it home with me after we had the funeral, some activity started to happen. A couple of days after the funeral, I was laying down in my bed and heard what sounded like footsteps. My sister was at a sleepover at the time, and my mother was already asleep, so I really thought nothing of it and went to bed. I woke up after I heard "I love you" in my grandpa's voice. I sat up in bed in tears and looked at the ceiling. And back to him, I said, "I love you too, Grandpa. I miss you so much." And I cried myself to sleep. As a kid, I stayed with my grandma at her house with my older brother upstairs. I was about 7 at the time. She lives out on a dirt road in front of a cornfield, and at night, it's super quiet. I'm sleeping in bed, and I'm woken up by a little girl's voice that says, "Wanna play?" It was dark, and moonlight shined through the window, but I thought it was my cousin because my grandma would just take us all in for the weekends. I turned around, but no one stood there. I looked down at my carpet, and the texture of it was fluffy, and I replied, "I can't see you." She said, "I'm right here." I looked over at my brother's bed and saw a pair of kids' feet by his bed. I said, "I don't think my grandma wants me playing now." It was 3 a.m. After that, I heard a couple say, "Come on, kids, we gotta go," like if they were heading on a vacation. My guess, they never made it. They were gone. I woke my grandma up and said that there's kids in my room and that they want to play with me, but we can't see them. Her face turned white. She turned all the lights on and slept with us. She moved out of the house. But many weird things happened. But that's my best ghost story, which is absolutely real. My boyfriend at the time and I were moving. Things were in boxes and the bed was taken apart. He always had insomnia, but I usually fell right asleep. This night, things felt off. I was tossing and turning for a good 30 minutes. He finally asked me what was up. I said it was nothing, but he pressed, and I finally said, "I just keep thinking I'm seeing something in the shadows." He pushed for me to say more, which was unlike him, but I finally started describing this thing. It was probably 7 feet tall, dark blue, almost black, defined large muscles, and sharp teeth. He cut me off and said, "Is it dripping and slimy looking?" I said, "Yeah." "Is it breathing really heavy and staring right at me?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He said he saw it too, and thought it was impatiently waiting for something, but then he didn't want to talk about it anymore. I found out later, through a friend who knew him as a teen, that he had a weird history with a place out in the country called Stone Church. She described him as a shy kid that didn't have any friends. He was kinda emo and desperately wanted to be liked by the cool kids at school. She said for fun one night, they went out to this abandoned church that was supposed to be haunted and played Bloody Mary, and crazy things started happening. At one point, the door swung shut and locked him in a room, and she couldn't get in for a few hours. But when he came out, he seemed different. She said the next day he was a changed guy. This was not the guy I knew at all, by the way. He was super charismatic and made friends everywhere he went. They were like his followers. Until she mentioned it, I never really realized how much they seemed to worship him. I was watching Paranormal Activity at a friend's apartment. My friend lived in an independent living portion of an orphanage. I was pretty unnerved by the end of the movie. After the end scene, the credits started to roll. However, they were not normal credits that you can read. The names were flying by so quickly on the screen that they were just a blur. My friend and I thought that was really strange, so she paused it so we could read the names. When she paused it, the screen showed a ton of tiny names, like 200 of them, and every single name was my first name with a different last name. My blood ran cold and I got chills all over. I could think of no rational explanation for why every single name on the screen was my own. Surely there couldn't have been 200 people with my same name working on the film. And for all the names to be grouped together instead of separated by their role on the film, it was so strange. When we pressed play again, all of a sudden the credits were rolling normally. I've watched the movie since then, and the credits were normal. I wanted to share this spine-tingling experience that happened to me during my sophomore year of high school. It was around fall, and my then boyfriend and I were watching Ender's Game at my place. We were home alone because my mom was at the hospital visiting my aunt on her way back from work. As we watched the movie, the sun had already set, and I suddenly heard what I thought was my mom opening the front door. Her footsteps, the dog's excitement, and a presumed trip to the garage for a smoke seemed like a typical evening routine. My boyfriend even noticed and said, "Your mom's home," to which I casually replied, "I know." I thought nothing more of it. However, time passed and she never came inside. I decided to check the garage, but the door was locked, which felt strange. I unlocked it and peered inside, only to find it shrouded in darkness. My unease growing, I proceeded to her room, but it was eerily empty. That's when I went outside and realized her car was gone from the driveway, as if it had disappeared into thin air. Puzzled and worried, I called my mom, asking if she came home and left again. Her response still haunts me to this day. "No, I'm just leaving the hospital now. Why? What's going on?" I was puttering around the house, doing my nighttime routine, and was walking down the hall to go take a shower. And in the office, there's a rocking chair. It's rocking violently. In the darkness, I can see there's a pitch black shadow in the chair. I bolted into the bathroom and slammed the door. I went to call my spouse, and of course, my phone was in the bedroom. I tried to shrug it off, figuring by the time I was done with my shower, it would be gone. I got out and looked, and it was still there, rocking the chair violently. I ran to the bedroom, and I can hear this thing run after me down the hallway. Loud, heavy footsteps, practically on my heels. I ran in my room, slammed the door, and called my spouse, and begged them to come. When they got home, they looked through the house, and the rocking chair was still rocking. We closed the office door and made the cat sleep in our room. Around 2019, I stayed in the Menger Hotel in San Antonio with my mom. One evening, we took the elevator up from the ground floor. On the second floor, the doors opened and a man got on with us. The second he appeared, I knew something was amiss. It felt like the atmosphere in the elevator changed. As he stepped on, he greeted us with a formal hello, and then stood facing the other side of the elevator, while my mom and I faced the doors. The man was close enough to me that I could see the stitching on his late 1800s style clothing, sleeve garters, heavy cotton long-sleeved shirt, vest. His outfit was clearly not a mass-produced costume, and the material looked like Victorian Gilded Age pieces I'd seen in the museum. The elevator opened on the next floor, and the man again spoke, telling us goodbye in the same distinct way he had said hello. As soon as the doors closed, my mom and I immediately looked at each other, both exclaiming something along the lines of, "What was that?" We each had sensed that something almost indescribable just happened, and were very shaken up by the experience. To this day, neither of us can come up with an explanation as to why it felt like particles around us changed the moment the man got on the elevator, or why his eyes never seemed to actually look at us as he stared off across the elevator in front of us. It's like he wasn't really there. He was missing that intangible quality that makes someone human, yet there he was, in the flesh. I made a homemade Ouija board and played with it while I was home alone. I said things that I shouldn't have said, that I invite any spirits, entities, or demons to come forward. I sat there, and the shot glass that I used never moved, so I got up and threw it out. It was around this time that the feeling of being watched came over me. We moved, and the feeling followed me. My stuff would disappear, then reappear, cold spots, breezes, lights flickering, strange dreams. Once, our bread loaf and a few kitchen utensils got thrown. There were a few times when my mom mentioned seeing shadow-like figures in our apartment. She said she saw something go toward our room one night. My younger brother, not that long ago, came running into our room, saying he had seen a dark shadow in our hallway. Most of these occurrences eased, but this feeling of being watched never left me. I slept in my uncle's old bedroom, while my sister slept on the couch in the living room. I've always been able to pick up on people's energy and can tell if someone is in the room with me. I thought that my sister had had a nightmare and was going to talk to me about it, so I rolled over to make contact with her. But what I saw wasn't my sister. It was a very tall man staring at me. His arms were crossed, and his overall body posture told me he was very angry and upset. At first, I thought it was my grandfather, but I realized almost immediately that the man in my doorframe was much taller, and his face was completely different. The way he glared at me scared me so much, I ran right through him, screaming and crying to my grandmother. It took a few years before she realized who the man was. When I was about 12, my grandmother went through a whole box of vintage pictures with me, explaining who they were. When she got to one photo of a young man in particular, it immediately caused me to have a flashback to that sleepover. When I asked who it was, she started crying and said it was her dad and that he had died very young. I was the last person awake at a summer camp, and I was watching TV, and I saw a man with an unkempt beard, mustache, worn farming clothes, and some sort of Fidel Castro-style military cap. He was both in front of the bedroom door and behind the kitchen counter, facing me. I could not see him from the waist down due to the kitchen counter. His body was see-through, hazily distorting the door's shape behind him. He was physically there, not as a sort of mist, but physically there, while also being just transparent enough to see through. His eyes had no pupils, only a grayed white void, but it felt like he was focused on me. We just stared at each other in silence. I was frozen with fear and dread. 30 seconds pass, and suddenly the man makes a subtle, angry smirk. I didn't know what to do, so I moved my chair directly in front of the TV, and I did not avert my eyes away from the TV again. I was ready to be, in the very least, chased by the man I had just retreated from. I stayed frozen, watching the television and not daring to look behind the armchair, even as the curtains began to light up from the morning sunrise. When I was 8 years old, I went to a funeral home after my grandmother died. When I got to the funeral home, it felt like a crowded stadium. There were so many ghosts of all ages that it was overwhelming. Some just stared at me, some smiled and waved at me. Some said things like, "Hi, little girl, how are you?" But there was one spirit that I really bonded with. I really liked her. She was a young woman, no older than about 26. While my parents were in the funeral director's office doing paperwork, I was outside the office. The young woman approached me. I'm assuming a motorcycle accident is what killed her. She had on a pair of jeans, a t-shirt with a black leather jacket, and a pair of tennis shoes. She was pale and had long black hair and blue eyes. She sat down beside me and asked what I was doing there. I told her. Then she put her hand on my leg and said she was sorry. She sat with me and we talked for about an hour while my parents were in the office. She told me her name was Sarah, and she asked me about my interests. When another ghost would try to interrupt us, she would tell them to go away. She seemed like she was a very strong woman. When my parents came out of the office, she disappeared. When we were leaving the funeral home, I turned around, and she was standing at the door. She smiled and waved at me, and then disappeared. I could always see things other people couldn't see. This ability was handed down to me by my mom and my grandmother. When I was younger, I lived in rural Connecticut and would explore the woods around my parents' property. It was there I found a long abandoned Victorian house and had to investigate. I didn't expect to see anyone else, but of course, that's not what happened. I was standing in the main entrance looking up the stairs when I saw her. She was pale and she was wearing a long white dress. She had long black hair and green eyes. I said hello to her and she smiled, waved, and said hello back to me. I asked her for her name and she said Melody. Then she disappeared. I went home but could not get the apparition out of my mind, so I went back the next day. That's when I found it, a grave with the name Melody on it. She was born in 1810 and died in 1836. I went home and picked some of my mom's roses and went back to the house and grave. I put the roses on the grave and then got the urge to look up. I looked up at the upstairs window of the home, and there she was, standing in the window staring at me. She smiled and waved, then disappeared. My husband and I moved into a 1929 house before we were married. I would often see shadows peripherally and began feeling as if we weren't alone in the house. We had a big black lab, and maybe the dog was making me feel that way, or there's some light coming in that caused it. She said, one day I tell my guy that I saw a small black shadow walk into the laundry room. I mentioned it because it wasn't an out of the corner of my eye experience this time. The laundry room is in the finished basement. There was no outside light source. A few weeks later, I was finishing some laundry and my husband was in the basement finishing up something on the computer. He asked me to put the dog in her crate while he finished up. All the lights were off, except for the hall light at the top of the stairs and from the PC. The black shadow walked into the laundry room. My husband said, "I thought you put the dog in her crate," and called the dog. The dog, however, was already in her crate. My husband asked again, "Can you please get the dog?" and waited. I asked him to turn around and look in the crate. He looks at the crate and looks back at the computer. "You saw it, didn't you? You saw the black shadow go into the laundry room too." This was the only time he ever admitted that he saw something in that house. In college, my friend and I rented a house in uptown New Orleans. When the school year began, our day-to-day routine was, for the most part, normal. But then I began to hear my roommate engage in a bizarre nightly ritual. Nearly every night after she'd gone to bed, I would hear her footsteps down the hallway. I could hear her walk into the bathroom, leave the door open, stay in there for a minute or two, not flush, then walk all the way back to her bedroom. I assumed that she was tiptoeing to the bathroom at night, using the toilet as quietly as she could, and waiting until morning to flush so she wouldn't wake me up. She always woke up before me, so I figured she must be flushing before she goes to class, and I must sleep through it? Okay, sure. When I brought up the trip to the bathroom and not flushing, my roommate's response was shocking. I've never gotten up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. These trips to the bathroom continued, but one night, this bathroom ghost got more personal. My bedroom door is closed, the lights are off all through the house, and I'm lying in bed waiting to fall asleep. I'm lying in bed on my side, facing the wall, and as usual, I hear bathroom ghost's footsteps down the hall. Only this time, bathroom ghost doesn't stop at the bathroom. I hear and feel bathroom ghost walk through my door and into my bedroom. I shut my eyes tight and I don't move. I feel bathroom ghost put their knee on my bed, compressing the mattress downwards. My back is facing bathroom ghost. Inexplicably, I know that if I open my eyes, I wouldn't see them anyway. I know they are invisible. Bathroom ghost climbs into bed with me. They wrap their arm around my side. I am the little spoon. I'm so absolutely freaked out that I don't move a muscle. I just lie there, eyes shut, for what feels like forever. I lie there so long, eventually I fall asleep. How could I have fallen asleep while cuddling with a ghost is beyond me. I once lived in a town that is often referred to as the most haunted house in I once lived in a town that is most often referred to as the most haunted town in Australia. I used to work in a bar on its main street in a building that's over 100 years old. According to story from the townsfolk, the building had 3 ghosts, mostly upstairs in an area that was no longer public. The bar just used it as storage, but all the people working at the bar experienced something they couldn't explain. The only time I was ever remotely unsettled by an encounter was with that of a young boy who, according to stories, had died in a fire. In this upstairs storage area was an old photograph of this boy, and to put it simply, he moves in the photo. Now he never moves while someone is watching, but you would look at the photo, look away for a second, and when you look back, the boy would be in a completely different position. I saw this happen on several occasions, and the only reason I know it wasn't a trick, or just me going crazy, is due to several of the bar staff, both past and present, having confirmed seeing the same thing. I used to work in a 1926 movie house that had been chopped up into 4 separate cinemas over the decades. As a manager, I had been issued a big keychain that gave me access to the entirety of the building, and I spent countless hours exploring nearly every part of it. In another section of the building was the old manager's office, with high ceilings and crown molding, and a beautiful stained glass window that I believe dated back to 1912. It had previously been part of an adjacent theater. There was an old safe in the office. I found a newspaper article in the public library from 1942 or 44 that detailed an armed robbery when 2 men had tied up the managers in the office and robbed the safe. We used the old manager's office to store giant 30-gallon bags of popcorn. I was obsessed with the history of the building and would research newspaper archives for articles about it. There were rumors that a stagehand had died there in an accident during the time that it had been a vaudeville theater. I was never able to confirm that. My mom told a friend that I was working there. She was allegedly a clairvoyant who had been to the theater and got feelings from it. She believed someone had been killed there and that his name began with the letter M. I was working alone one time in the old office on a slow midweek night. I was doing paperwork, the intercom buzzed, and it was the box office cashier calling to tell me I had a phone call. I asked who it was, and she said that she didn't know. I hung up the intercom and pushed the button for the main incoming line where the call was holding. Earpiece erupted with loud squealing and static. "Hello?" I said. Nothing, just more squealing and static. "Hello?" I repeated. "Hello," a man's voice, calm, flat, distinct, then nothing further. "Who is this?" I was a bit perplexed. All of the noise on the line, and the caller seemingly reluctant to speak. "This is Mike." Calm and quiet, not shouting over the noise of the line, quite audible and clear, and then nothing but awful squealing and static. I waited a few seconds for the caller to continue. After all, he called me. Presumably, there was a reason. Nothing. "Mike who?" I said, feeling a little impatient. Mike is a common name, and there were 2 Mikes employed there at the time. One of them had a fairly high-pitched voice that sounded nothing like the caller. It didn't sound like the other Mike either. The line abruptly went dead, silent. Squealing and hissing stopped, and I waited. No one called back. I called Sandy, the box office cashier, and asked her if they asked for me personally or just to speak to the manager. She said that the caller had asked for me by name. Suddenly, I remembered my mother's friend, a man's name beginning with the letter M. Mike. It never happened again, and the phone never made those noises. No one ever confessed to a prank, and I never figured out who it was.